Have you ever tuned into a pro Rocket League player stream, or even someone remotely good, and noticed that their Rocket League looks like it came straight out of 2007? Ever wondered why they put this on themselves? Welcome back to Non-Meta, and today we're going to talk about why ugly games might make you a little bit better. Basically all PC games come with a wide degree of control over how they look. It's a selling point of the platform after all. You get to dictate how good or bad a game looks and runs, often those things working against each other. It's a trade, and you get to decide how far it goes from one side or the other. But why do pro players, specifically Rocket League pro players, have their settings so low, often as low as they go? The obvious answer is performance and latency. Generally speaking, more frames equals more better. More better? But you may wonder why someone would push their frame rate beyond the refresh rate of their monitors, as it seems sort of pointless. To explain that, we'll need to talk about input. For all intents and purposes, inputs can only be registered when a frame is drawn. So, if I were to press A, nothing would happen until that information could be processed along with a frame, and then I'd jump. Or whatever I had A on. However, a drawn frame is not the same thing as a displayed frame. Your monitor has a refresh rate, which is how often it updates all the pixels on the screen. However, as soon as it receives a new frame of information, it will immediately start showing that information instead. This is what causes screen tearing, by the way, as half the screen renders the previous frame and the other half starts rendering the new frame. The refresh rate is just how often the monitor displays new information, while the frame rate is how often new information is produced. Your GPU will attempt to create new frames as fast as it reasonably can, unless you cap the frame rate. So the higher the frame rate, the sooner new inputs are likely to be processed, which is why, even though you may only have a refresh rate of 60, uncapping your frame rate or reducing settings can actually make the game feel more responsive, even though nothing visually has changed. The second reason pros make the game look like the previous installment is for visual clarity. When you're playing, there are certain visual cues you need to focus on. In the case of Rocket League, it's things like player positioning and the behaviour of the ball. In other games it might be who's who and where they're going. Even though a lot of Rocket League settings do make this game look a lot better, they also often provide noise which can distract and obscure important information about what's happening. You may have experienced this before, in fact, when you're watching an aerial and the god rays from the sun obscure your vision. You wouldn't want that when there's MMR or even money on the line, for instance. Although sometimes I believe some players can take the settings a little too far, trading fairly useful or even visually unobtrusive visuals like texture quality for very small frame rate gains. In the end, how you want your game to look and feel is up to you. These are my usual settings. I think they provide a nice balance between making the game look good while keeping it clear and maintaining a decent performance. I don't have any competitive aspirations, however, but I have no doubt that if that ever changed, my game wouldn't look too far from the rest. So, what is it like playing Rocket League at max settings? Well, it's a mixed bag. Don't get me wrong, it looks great, but there's a reason most of this stuff's turned off as soon as possible. The main culprit is screen shake, obviously, which obscures vision every time you make contact with anything. Probably the worst setting in the game and the first to go off for most. It's even heavily suggested that it's disabled and is considered a competitive requirement. Stuff like weather and particle effects are unnecessary, but they do look quite nice, I suppose. However, it is obvious visual clutter that hogs performance that could be better used elsewhere. Most of the additional post-processing effects are hit or miss, really. Some are great when you're making a YouTube video, for instance, but less so when you actually need to play the game. Shaders are interesting, as I think they do provide additional information that could be used, so I find it strange people do turn them off, but I understand why someone with thousands of hours wouldn't really need it. Overall, if you have professional aspirations, it's clear that most of these settings are just obstacles in your way for a smooth performance. Opinions on game visuals are obviously subjective, but the numbers don't lie. You may never know when that extra frame might make the difference.